We're expanding things a lot. So one thing that's like really been driving us is we get inspired by sequels that kind of don't play it safe, that take risks with the mechanics and really try to like take things to the next level and expand things.
It's different for a sequel than the original, because the original you don't have a lot to draw from. It's all kind of fresh ideas. And with the sequel, you could easily fall into the trap of like, okay, the first one was great, and you start operating out of fear of like, okay, we need the giraffe moment, we need the winter sequence, we need the guy that's going to be like David. And I've definitely felt that, like, I don't know if these scenes are going to be as good as that, but you kind of have to ignore all that and say, okay, what is this story? What are the moments for this story? Where are the characters now? They're very different than the characters they were in the first game, and just honor that. Like, there might not be a giraffe sequence, there might not be a character like David, but there will be different moments, and hopefully they resonate as much as the ones in the first game.
So, The Last of Us Part 2 is apparently going to be a risk-taking sequel that will try to avoid replicating the first game. But does that mean the only thing we'll see from the first game are the weapons, Joel, Ellie, and Jackson? Hey everyone, my name is the iPad Cat, and in today's video we're discussing the possibility of returning characters in The Last of Us Part 2. Who could we see? And what would their role in the story be? Just a quick note before we begin. I recently hit 100 subscribers, and I made a channel update video where I want you, the viewers' input on what this channel's future should be. So if you could just quickly go over to that video and watch it, or just vote in the poll if you don't want to watch it, it would mean a lot to me. The iPad Cat from the future here. Some of my awesome subscribers have actually already set up the Discord server I discussed in my channel update video, so, well, you could go ahead and join it. It would be awesome if you did. It's about everything the iPad Cat and The Last of Us and other games too, I guess. So go ahead and join. Anyways, without further ado, let's get started. So, let's start by recounting all the major-ish characters from The Last of Us Part 1, and count out the ones that probably won't return in any other form than perhaps being mentioned. So here goes. Sarah, Joel, Tommy, Tess, Robert, Marlene, Bill, Sam, Henry, Maria, David, James, and Riley. So Sarah probably won't return. Firstly because she's dead, and secondly because her story/role was completed in the first game. Sarah was there to create the personality of Joel, to show how he went from a caring father to ruthless, cold, and murderous survivor. She was there to help the players understand why he was so hesitant to open up to Ellie. That's why she was continuously referred to throughout the story.
I got something for you. Last year I went back to Texas, back home. Most of our stuff is long gone. Most of it. Here. It's a little faded, but it still looks pretty good.
I'm good.
You sure? I mean...
I've said I'm good.
Okay. I'll hold on to it for you.
There isn't really the need for that in The Last of Us Part 2, or as far as we know at least, so Sarah probably won't return. Joel has already been confirmed to return on multiple occasions, but he's a main character. I'll save my thoughts on him and his role in the story for another video. Tommy is an interesting one. We don't know if he's alive or not. The last we saw of him was when we left for the university, but as he could return, we'll talk more about him in just a second. Tess was an important character to Joel. She was there to sort of keep him in line and show that he still had some humanity left. She was also, if you don't know, a leftover from the original story of The Last of Us, where she was actually the villain hunting Joel and Ellie down on their journey throughout the US. And as she obviously doesn't have that role in the full game, and as she was sort of acting as the link between Joel and Ellie, she had to go. Despite her importance to Joel and his relationship with Ellie, I don't think Tess will return. And just to clarify, when I say return, I mean in some sort of flashback or dream sequence, when it's about these dead characters. Because we know that this is more of Ellie's story than it is Joel's, and Ellie only knew Tess for literally 1 to 2 days before she died. I think we can say with almost 100% certainty that Robert won't return in part 2. He's dead. And he was only really there to show what sort of life Joel and Tess was living, working as ruthless smugglers before the main story picked up. Marlene, on the other hand, could be important to the story in the second game, for unlike Tess, Marlene was actually Ellie's only parental figure in the quarantine zone, and one of the few people Ellie really knew. She was close to Ellie's real mother, and arguably more important, she was the leader of the Fireflies, which are confirmed to in some way or another return in part 2. But as it's possible she'll return, I'll talk more about it in a second. Bill is also plausible. From a personal standpoint, I'd really like to see him again, as Bill's town was one of my favorite parts of the game. But are we going to see him again? Well, more on that in a moment. Sam and Henry are also two of those characters that fulfilled their role in the first game. They acted as the antithesis to Joel and Ellie. Whereas Joel didn't really care that much and was fairly disconnected from Ellie, Henry was extremely overprotective of Sam. Their relationship and their eventual fate was there for Joel to realize that this was what was going to happen to him if he didn't get rid of Ellie, which is why I don't believe they'll return. Maria, like Tommy, lived in Jackson in part 1, and we last saw her at the dam. Her return is very possible, and we'll discuss that in a moment. David is an interesting one. While he certainly is very, very dead, he was also as close as we got to a real antagonist in The Last of Us Part 1. And he had a big impact on Ellie. And as I mentioned earlier, this is more her story, so his return is possible. James, on the other hand, one of David's goons, will, like Robert, almost 100% not return. I really couldn't tell you what purpose he had other than for Ellie to jam David's machete, or maybe his kitchen knife or whatever it was, into his face. It could also have been to show that David maybe wasn't the best and most trusted leader, almost like James was the link between the cannibal community and the player and David. Nevertheless, that purpose was filled and doesn't need to be filled again. Riley is also an interesting one. Although we didn't see her die, she most certainly did die. But as Neil discussed in a Game Informer interview, there will be some focus on Ellie's love life and relationships in the second game. And how could they do that without bringing Riley into it somehow? Anyways, now we're left with Tommy, Marlene, Bill, Maria, David and Riley. How could they return and what role could they have in the story? Let's start with Tommy and Maria. Well, we know that Maria and her family were the ones who took the initiative to found Jackson.
I don't know what you heard, but you should see the town. We're over 20 families strong now. It was Maria and her father. They set up this place with the idea of being self-sustained. We got crops and livestock. Remember how we thought no one could live like this anymore? And we're doing it.
And thus, her family will probably have some important role in the leadership of that settlement. And that probably means Tommy also does have some leading role. This is also supported by the fact that the pair seem to be running the operation at the dam when we arrive there in part 1. Depending on how big of a role the Jackson part that is supposed to take place 4 years after the end of part 1 has in the story, Tommy and Maria could both be returning in some minor way. I don't think that they're a part of the timeline where Ellie is hunting down the Seraphites. The characters prominent there will probably be Joel, Lev, Yara, and the Mystery Woman. Maybe the two of them act as a window to, or a reminder for part 1. Maybe Tommy is responsible for organizing the guard patrols Joel, Dina, Jesse, and Ellie are a part of. And maybe Maria has taken over as the acting leader as her parents or other family members have gotten too old. I mean, this is heavy speculation, but you get my point. Another interesting thing is, if this violent act Neil Druckmann mentioned in his blog post after the E3 demo is the cult attacking Jackson, it raises the question, is Tommy and Maria going to die in part 2? It could happen, and it would be interesting how that would affect Joel. I mean, losing his only biological family he had left. Moving on, we have Marlene. Obviously she can't return physically, but she could have an important role in the story. During the very first The Last of Us Part 2 panel, Neil said that a sequel would mean revisiting the ending of the first game and what it meant. And Marlene does have a big role in the ending of The Last of Us Part 1. Because Joel does not only lie about the cure, he doesn't mention the massacre or the fact that he killed basically one of Ellie's only friends and what really would have been her, at least sort of, mom. While Ellie probably could see through the lie that was about the cure, how could she possibly know that Joel killed Marlene in the process? If Marlene is brought up and the truth comes out, how will that affect Joel and Ellie's relationship? And the Fireflies, who will in some way be in the game. Maybe Marlene's death acted as a rallying cry for their entire organization and has made them a force to be reckoned with in part 2. Finally, maybe we actually could see Marlene in her physical form, in a flashback. It's not that far-fetched, since in Uncharted 4 we went way back to when Nate was just a kid, so maybe we'll see some of Ellie's life prior to Left Behind, where Marlene was quote-unquote watching over her. Then there is Bill. Even though he probably is alive and well in part 2, how would he fit into the story? I don't even think it would fit through a flashback, if it weren't through Joel's eyes and to some time when he and Tess were meeting him prior to the first game. But what would be the point of that? And why would Ellie go all the way back to the East Coast just to say hi to Bill? No, it just doesn't seem likely that he'll return, at least to me. Although I would like him to return, since I like both his character and his town. David. How could David return? Breakthrough Gaming, another The Last of Us channel, has already made a lot of videos on how David could return, so I'd recommend you go check them out. But here's my take on it. David and his actions greatly affected Ellie in the first game, and as we know, the second game will have a theme of hate and retribution. I imagine Ellie is going to go through moments of intense emotion. Maybe some of them so intense that she starts seeing things. Maybe she hallucinates David harassing her, or maybe she dreams nightmares about him. And as Nolan North accidentally confirmed The Last of Us Part 2 was in production before it was even revealed, it doesn't seem that far of a stretch that he could return to his role in Part 2, unless he portrayed some other character. Finally, we have Riley, Ellie's first love. As I mentioned earlier, it was said by Druckmann that Part 2 will at least explore some of Ellie's love life, and how could they possibly do that without bringing Riley into it? Maybe Dina and Ellie have some intimate encounters, which then makes Ellie feel guilty as she's reminded of Riley. And maybe these moments of intense emotion I mentioned just now could make her hallucinate or dream about her. Anyways, that's just what I think. What do you think? Which characters do you think will return, and which do you want or not want to return? Tell me in the comments down below and let's discuss it. And until next time, have a great day.